I hope you can hear me well. This is I'm Sheila Heymans, the Executive Director of the European Marine Board, and I am your moderator today. Welcome to the European Marine Board's third Thursday Science webinar series. It is the first one of the year, and I'm looking forward to hearing about great science today. So some housekeeping rules. Please make sure that your name is clearly entered when you come into, so that we know who you are when you're asking questions. If you do want to ask questions, please use the Q&A and also let us know where you're from, what organization, what country, so that we know who's asking the questions. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat function. And the host will be able to, my team will be able to help you there. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the Marine Board website and on the Marine Board's YouTube channel. So today we have a talk that's linked to our position paper number 28, Navigate the Future 6, which is on placing the ocean in the wider Earth system. This talk is entitled How to Prepare for the Future, Scenarios for Future Water Conditions and Sea Level Rise Adaptation Strategies from the Netherlands. And our speaker today is Renske de Winter. Renske is a senior researcher at Deltares, and she was a member of the working group that wrote the document Navigate the Future 6. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing, and Renske, I see, is there already. So Renske, you are more than welcome to start sharing your screen and continue with your presentation. Thanks. You're muted, so we can't hear you.
This should be better. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Sheila, for this introduction. In the upcoming 30 minutes, I will tell you a bit more on how we in the Netherlands deal with uncertain future. And to this end, I will present results from two presentations or two research projects, one focusing on more near future plausible conditions, and the other one on how we can adapt to accelerated sea level rise. But before I start diving into this, I will tell that in the Netherlands, as a low-lying country, where we have multiple rivers discharging in the sea, that we have been adapting to those changing conditions for centuries. So that we have to adapt is not new, and I think this holds for a lot of places around the world where we think that in view of climate change that we have to do something new. But I think it's important to realize that humankind has been flexible in the past, and that we're very inventive in finding new solutions. So we have those small pillars. I will indicate them here. So you have the small pillars at first with houses on top of them. So during high water events, the houses would remain dry. And then later in time, we start developing polders with dike system pumping out. So land reclamations, and then in the last century, we had quite some big works in the north of the country, closing off an inland sea, but also in the south of the country, where multiple estuaries were dammed or not dammed, but closed off after storm surge events. Now, at the moment, we have a large community within the Netherlands preparing and thinking how we can move forward, being a country that is low-lying and also vulnerable for flooding. We have very high safety levels, and we are exploring how we can maintain those safety standards. The presentation today will be following the framework presented here. It's based on the dynamic adaptive pathways approach. The idea is that you first identify your risks. So how do future conditions look like? Then you start exploring how does the system respond to those future conditions? What type of options are there? And then you can explore with adaptation pathways how this develops in time. Once you have that, you can also explore which path you would consider to be beneficial, what you want. And then you can also design a plan and also monitor and when you should start adapting to this. First, I will dive into the identification of risks. This is based on a research project that is presented last April, sketching the water conditions in the Netherlands in 2050 and 2100. Then I will dive into what will happen under extreme accelerated sea level rise, so what you can expect in the coming century, but also what could occur under more uncertain conditions. And then finally, I will explore, tell a bit more on how you can use this information for the other steps. But to kick off with the first one, the Delta scenarios, those are designed in collaboration. So within the Netherlands, we have the ministry, but next to that, we have also Delta Commissioner, which is, it is a governmental institute, but it's not connected to the ministry itself. So it's an independent commissioner with a group of people working on this and exploring how the Netherlands should, from a water perspective, should develop. So we collaborated with this Delta Commissioner, but also with the ministry to explore how water conditions could change. And we made that a distinction between what plausible conditions could be by 2050 and 2100, but also explore what could be potential developments outside those plausible conditions, and explore what other more extreme sites could be. Why we did this is to have insights in future water tasks and also the bandwidth of future water tasks. And this enables timely action on those future conditions. So you do not act once the conditions are there, but we wanted to implement and to be on time with those measures. Also because it takes time to install measures. This is part of a cyclic approach. So this is an update of the 2070 Delta scenarios. And they're part also of the recalibration. So based on those scenarios, bottlenecks within the Dutch water system will be identified. And also it will be, measures will be formulated. Why do we work with this? Well, we want to have insights in future flood risk, future freshwater availability, but also water nuisance. So this is just water on the streets after peak rainfall events. And the grounding principles is that these are context scenarios, so there's no wishful thinking there's no normative in it. We based our assessment on all the information that is currently well established and they're scientifically sound. We joined insights from both climate perspective, but also socio-economic developments and also climate mitigations actions that are needed since as the Netherlands, we committed ourselves to the Paris Agreement, and we merged those insights to come up with projections and scenarios for water conditions in 2050 and 2100. And then this is how these scenarios look like, with on the left axis information on the socio-economic growth, either high socio-economic growth in blue and reddish up here, or with limited socio-economic growth in yellow and green. Then on the right axis, we have information on the amount of climate change worldwide and also the amount of emission reduction within the Netherlands. And then we assumed that those go hand in hand. So once we, as worldwide, we are able to reduce our emissions, it also means that climate change is limited. And in the Netherlands also, actions have been taken to minimize CO2 emissions. So to this end, we have two scenarios with limited climate change. So this means well below 2 degrees, which, well, given the recent developments that we passed the 1.5 threshold last year, might be a bit optimistic, but on the other hand, is something that worldwide many countries have committed to, that we will stay below this 2 degrees. So to some extent, this is current policy. We have, so in the blue and the green scenarios, climate change will stay well below 2 degrees, but a lot of efforts are needed within the Netherlands to also, as the Netherlands become emission neutral. Then we have 2 other scenarios, the red and the yellow scenario. And then under those scenarios, the climate change is quite rapid with more than 4 degrees by the end of this century. And then efforts to reduce CO2 emissions are limited. They're present to some extent. This is in line with what we currently see, but less compared to the blue and the green scenario. And if you look into this, then you get a palette of different developments. So with some having more climate change, and others have more efforts for emission reductions. But on top of that, since the socioeconomic developments are underneath, we can see that that every scenario has a distinct own storyline on how conditions will be by 2050 and 2100. We had an extensive stakeholder engagement in this process, and there was a need from the stakeholders to also have information on how this would differ per region. So we identified this for, on the left, freshwater availability, then in the middle, water nuisance, and on the right, flood safety. And what we see is that for freshwater availability, although the Netherlands is a relatively small country, the characteristics or the changes that can be expected in the future differ quite a lot per region. So we have regions where fresh water is distributed via a system of sluices and small channels that bring the water to those places, so we can really manage. So basically, the west of the country, for a lot of areas, we can manage how much water is coming there, and also precisely what the water levels are in those polders. Then we have regions indicated in pinkish areas that are near the large rivers. And we have in green, more in the east of the country, we have sandy soils, and here typically this balance could occur if you have more groundwater extraction than there is rainfall, and then groundwater levels could lower. And this also happened during in the past when we have a sequence of dry summers, and then also groundwater levels started to drop. This also means that farmers or drink water companies could not get as much fresh water from the subsoil as they wanted. Then for water nuisance, we see a similar difference between low-lying areas in the west of the country, where there will be, during events of water nuisance, it will be difficult to discharge the water, because in this system that I just referred to, where we can bring water to every polder, almost in every location, during peak rainfall events, this works the other way around, and then the same system has to be used to pump all the water out. And there you can have hindrance, because if the capacity is not sufficient, or if water levels at the seasides are elevated, and therefore water cannot be pumped out, water nuisance can occur in polders. Then more in the west of the east of the country, you could have river runoff. So if you have slight elevations, you can have, during peak rainfall events, you can have runoffs. This also happens in 2021 in the south of the country, where also in Germany and Belgium we had quite an extreme event, an extreme rainfall event, and that also in Belgium and Germany resulted in several casualties. And here you can also argue whether this is still water nuisance or it's running more into the domain of flood risk events. Then flood risk, I think typically from a climate perspective, there's a lot of focus on flood risk. Well, this is very well covered in the Netherlands. We have, well, 2 main drivers that could cause flood risk. On one hand, this is during elevated sea level sea levels during storm events where the coastal region water levels could be as much as 3 meters higher. We have a system of dikes, storm surge barriers and dunes here. They're monitored every several years to and tested if they're still strong enough. And then on top of that, we have rivers discharging towards the sea, and we have a system of river dikes. There's a program in the moment installed to prepare the Netherlands for those future conditions. And by 2050, this program should be finished and all the dikes should be future-proof. What we do see, if you merge those different water aspects, so freshwater availability, water nuisance, and flooding, you see that every region has a challenge there, but it differs. But there is a piling up of challenges. So you have that in the coming decades, we have to have interventions both to ensure that there is sufficient fresh water, that we are safe during peak rainfall events, and that we will not flood. And this combination, yeah, so this also means that all the measures have to be, they should all address all those aspects and not just a single one of them. So the main insights from these scenario studies is that regardless the scenario, in all scenarios, the water challenges will increase. This is on one hand because we have an increase in climate change, and with that, higher sea levels, changes in river discharge, with higher discharges in the winter during winter times, and lower discharges in the summer. But also due to socioeconomic development. So if you have an increased population, this also means that your demand for fresh water, for drinking water, will increase. And then also the demand from industry for fresh water can increase. And those also interact. So if you have higher sea level rise, then also the salt water intrusion in the main rivers will be larger. So fresh water is needed to counteract that aspect, but the same fresh water is needed in other places for agriculture needs or for drink water purposes. And then we are, as the Netherlands, also one of 5 European countries with CO2 emissions based, so ground-based CO2 emissions, since we have a lot of peat areas, and those need wettening to counteract. So at the moment, water levels in those areas there are lowered. And then the top layer is emitting CO2. This can be counteracted by higher the water levels, but this also requires fresh water demands. And we already saw that in many cases, this fresh water is also needed for other functions. So you get, even if you have limited climate change, you can get still an increase in your fresh water demand because you need the water also for wettening the peat areas. So next to this increase in water challenges in all regions, we also see that there is a piling up of water challenges, and this differs per region how this exactly looks like, but almost every region has a combination of water shortages and water nuisance and flooding. And on top of that, we're also facing many other societal challenges, such as the energy transition. We have a shortage of houses at the moment. Nature is under pressure. So there are many societal challenges are playing, and they all need to be solved in the spatial domain. And then also, I think it's very important to stress once again that if we do not meet, we cannot stop climate change, and in this situation, climate will continue to change. And also from an adaptation perspective, this means that your design criteria will continue to change, and it is so it will result in larger water tasks with less time to adapt, larger tasks, but also larger uncertainty to work with. And then next to the regular plausible scenarios, we identified what if development, because we see that then, and this is new in contrast to previous delta scenarios, but we saw that there are so many ongoing developments that are uncertain, but could impact the water system largely. For instance, extreme accelerated sea level rise, also changes in extreme weather, changes in upstream land and soil use. We did identify how river discharges could change due to, so from a climate perspective, but if summers will become a lot drier with less precipitation and a larger part of Europe is impacted by this, this could also mean that since we are downstream of all the rivers, that the water is used upstream and that river runoffs during summer periods will be even lower. Then there's this shift in agricultural renewal, so it's uncertain what will happen there. We see autonomous adaptation. So to give an example of this, in the previous scenarios, we did not include measures that individual farmers would take to counteract periods of drought. And then since 2017, we had several very dry summers, and many agricultural people invested in having their own pumping system to get water from the subsurface, with as a result that the water demand and also the whole groundwater balance is shifting. So if many people take similar actions, you could have, also this could have a big impact. And then finally, what's not included is large-scale transitions in land use. The results, they are presented in last April. We gave the report to the minister and Delta commissioner, and then there was also a technical briefing in Parliament in June. I think this also indicates, at least for the Netherlands, how important future water conditions are. And then luckily it was also picked up by media a lot, and we had several publications in media, and this I think is very important because we can as scientists do a lot of work, but in the end it's how we will adapt. And I think the use of water and the impact that water has on people's life is impacting all of us, and it should be also a societal discussion how we want to move forward. Then what's next? So now those scenarios are presented. At the moment, there's a bottleneck analysis is ongoing to identify, based on those scenarios, what problems can occur. And then by 2026, this overall assessment will be presented and also measures will be formulated, so how we can move forward. And then I will move on to the second part, and this kind of covers completely different set of research that I worked on, and this is mainly on, because I now presented how we can deal with plausible futures, but next to that there are also futures that are less certain and that a lot of deep uncertainties are related to, but impacts could be large. And as an example, I will take results from the studies that we did with respect to extreme accelerated sea level rise. For this area, I will cover how we can map the solution space, how you can identify, and also how you can move forward having such an uncertain future. Yeah, here I am. So for sea level rise, it's important to realize that this is largely related to the amount of emissions that are emitted. It's a relatively slow, the increase in sea level rise is relatively slow compared to other climate parameters, which also means that at the moment, so around 2020, the difference is quite limited. And also by 2050, the difference where you see that in temperature increase by 2050, you see clear distinction between climate scenarios. For sea level rise, this is not the case. They're quite closely connected, and they start to deviate at the end of the century, but also because the response of sea level rise to higher temperatures is relatively small. So one of the main components is, well, two main components are thermal expansion, so that's heat uptake by the ocean, and also mass loss of the ice sheets. And both of those processes go relatively slow. And also if you have an increase, also if you take a cube of ice from your freezer, you put it on the table, it's not melted in a second. It takes a while. Well, the same happens for those massive ice sheets. It takes a while before they are in a balance again with the increased atmospheric temperature. As a result, the increase in well, sea level rise will continue to increase even if we stabilize our emissions and temperature increase is stabilized. So even if we stay well below, our emissions stay, we reduce our emissions to the level that the temperature increase stays well below 2 degrees. Even in this situation, after 2100, sea level will continue to rise. So there's a bandwidth of approximately 0.5 meter by the end of this century, and then depending on your climate scenarios, the range will become larger, and then by 2300, the increase is somewhere between 0.5 meters to 3 meters for lower emission scenarios, and then 2 to 7 meters for higher emission scenarios. So they will increase after 2100, as I just indicated. Then I will circle back to what implications of this could be for the Netherlands. So first of all, we have this system as indicated here, where we have in dark blue areas that are below mean sea level. We have several rivers discharging to the sea, and we have this system of dike rings that allows us to be safe from flooding. Next to flooding, we need also fresh water supply, also under those higher sea level rise scenarios, and we have programs, as I just presented, via those delta scenarios and also cyclic assessments. We have a separate program running for all the dikes and reinforcing all the dikes, include up to 1 meter by 2100. Also, we are exploring what could happen if we need to do more than that. But what if the sea level rises much faster? So what if there's an increase expected after 2100? But next to that, several studies also indicate that either due to rapid mass loss or instabilities in West Antarctica, sea level rise could go faster, or that collapse of the AMOC would result in higher sea level rise rates. As a result of this could indicate that if you now assume that you have 55 years to adapt to the first 0.5 meter, then you can say, well, under the lower emission scenarios, we'll reach this. So we will reach 0.5 meter either in 55 years or in 110 years. So we have plenty of time to adapt to those first 0.5 meter of increase. And we have to realize, and that's here in this dotted line, this is in the situation where sea level rise will go much faster, that the time that we have to adapt to the additional 0.5 meter is much less. So where you have 55 years for your first 0.5 meter to adapt to, you only have 25 years for the 0.5 meter afterwards. And then you only have 15 years to adapt to the from 1 meter to 1 meter and a half. So in order to be in time, though we are very on the super safe side at the moment, we want to also explore what we should do in cases of those more uncertain sea level rise increase. To this extent, we identified where changes will be, what type of adjustments are needed, and we explored the amount of sand that is needed. So we have a huge sandy coast at the moment that with sand nourishment is reinforced every once in a while to be safe. So we see that here more efforts are needed. Also storm surge barriers will close more frequently. And then if you have an open harbor connections and your storm surge barriers is closed off more often, then this is, shipping will experience more hindrance. Also drought risk will increase, and also because we are a large part of the area is below mean sea level at the moment, this is pumped out or it's discharged during neap tides. But if you have higher mean sea level, this also means that the pumping capacity needs to increase. And it's so it's not really the matter of when it will happen, but more if it will happen and how you can then adjust. So we identified a set of those tipping points. In view of time, I will speed up a bit. And then based on this, we also sketched or explored how can you then adapt. So this is typically the kind of news that generates a lot of tractions within the Netherlands. There's a lot of people thinking in how we can adapt to that. And we made an overview of all those plans and kind of categorize them into certain aspects. And then also indicating, so we kind of focused, we came up with 4 categories and how you can adapt to this accelerated sea level rise. Either with closing off your coastline completely, having only discharge via pumps, having a partly open system, which is quite similar to what we have at the moment. So with open connections between rivers and the sea, but then more dike reinforcements along the main river branches. You could also go more to the seawater approach, which sounds maybe a bit weird, but it's typically also something that we've done in the north, where we closed off the former Southern Sea, made it a lake, and also had land reclamations in this area. You could do similar things with either a huge dam or having just extend your coastline. And then the final option that we identified is more an accommodate or relocate, and that means more living with water. And also circling back to what I showed in the beginning, this would imply having living on elevated grounds, allowing the area around it to flood from time to time. And how then do you take all this information on adaptation tipping points and future conditions and kind of glue it together, how to, from a policy perspective, move forward? To this end, we have adaptation policy pathways. I'll guide you through this. So on the x-axis, we have sea level rise. You have the present day conditions, and then on those circles, they indicate adaptation tipping points. So moments in time where your conditions are no longer met. Then once you have reached such a point, you can take measures. You can either go to, so if you have your storm surge barriers have to close off too often, you can either build a new one, or you can just leave it open and reinforce your dikes afterwards. But also those measures in itself have an additional tipping points in time, and then you can, so in time you also have to adjust this measure, and with this schedule you can kind of sketch how you can move through your measures in time, and also evaluate where you end up if you take certain sequences of measures, and also analyze if this is what you want, or you can have a societal discussion on this. But it does connect far future to near future decision making, because you realize that if you install a new storm surge barrier, that, for instance, that in time you have to revisit this decision again. This was a fairly simple overview, but you could also do this for more complicated systems, and then evaluate or have discussions, which is currently also done within regions, like what do you want, what would be a preference of this particular region? How does far future needs, how are they connected to present day needs, and vice versa? Then also what is quite important and also pointed out in the Navigating the Future document is how those adaptation pathways by itself, they form a really nice format to connect sequences of measure to each other and also evaluate different aspects of those measures, but you also need signals and timely signals for this proper adaptation. And I will sketch that. So for instance, if you say by 2100 we want to be adapted to a certain to 1 meter of sea level rise. This means that you have a certain amount of time for your plan, for your implementation, and you need a certain amount of time for your planning. And then you can say, well, we still have some time before we have to start with that. But then if you include your scenarios, then you can see that under those more uncertain conditions that you might need to start earlier. And then you might need to start planning and even maybe implementing your measures at a moment in time where there's still no, so the increase of sea level rise is not yet measured. And to this end, it is very important that we have adaptation signals. And then also this connects, and this is also where there is this very strong connection to what's happening in the ocean, to what is needed from a coastal adaptation perspective, because we need those adaptation signals. Just measuring sea level rise will not be enough probably to have on time your adaptation signals. So you need to either monitor your AMOC or the slowdown of the AMOC, or monitor what's happening in West Antarctica to know or to kind of get better insight in to what extent the dotted line would be realistic. So to wrap up, I today explored you more or less what is happening, how you could use the dynamic adaptation pathways approach to deal with uncertainties and to have your coastal and delta adaptation plan installed. First, I briefly discussed the delta scenarios, where I showed that under every scenario, which is a combination of climate change and socio-economic developments, there will be an increase in water challenges. And there will be per region a specific combination of both water shortages and water nuisance and flooding. And that measures need to address all those aspects in a field that is currently already, so in space, the spatial domain, where already a lot of other challenges are also happening. And then if we continue to emit greenhouse gases, it is expected that also climate change will continue to increase. And with that, the water challenges will become even larger, and we will have less time to adapt because we have larger tasks. Then from the dynamic adaptation pathway approach, it's very important to realize that there is at the moment a very large bandwidth of future sea level rise. The rate of sea level rise is very important because this also indicates how fast you can adapt to future conditions. And adaptations could alter your whole delta system and your whole delta layout largely. And it is important that we have timely signals also from the ocean, so we know when we have to adapt our coastal strategies. Thank you. And then I'd like to give the floor to Sheila.
Thank you very much, Renske. That was great. You can probably stop sharing your screen if you want. And I'm happy to take questions. A reminder for everybody to please put your questions in the Q&A. I see there are no questions there yet, but people are probably typing them as we speak. So I will start a little bit with what you had at the end about the knowing the oceanographic signals, and I don't know if it's maybe a question that you would know the answer to, but do you think that we have enough information about the AMOC and other signals to be able to do that yet, or do you think there's more work needed?
I think there's more.
How uncertain do you think it is?
Sorry, could you repeat?
how uncertain do you think we are about these future scenarios?
Well, I think ideally so I didn't touch upon this in this presentation, but I've been in a working group with sea level rise experts within the Netherlands, both from sea level rise projection side, particularly also working on those ice sheet dynamics and AMOC dynamics, and also with more policy implementers. And I think it would be very good if those domains, if we would have more opportunities from in those domains to do interdisciplinary research, because from a policy perspective, they say we need more information on the sea level rise projections. So at the moment, we will only take no regret actions. And then in a few decades, we will have more information and sufficient information to have proper adaptation aspects in place. Well, at the same time, the sea level rise projection people, scientists, they say, well, it's not certain that by 2050 we will have better projections. So there's a mismatch there in expectations from sea level rise projection scientists and from the policy world. And I think it would be very good if we have more opportunities to connect those worlds. And also to have better insight. So from a adaptation perspective, it would be very good to have better information on when you could expect 0.5 meter to 1.5 meters. So this range is quite important. And this is maybe more important than knowing precisely if it will be 3 or 4 meters. So I think, and this is just to give an example, but I think there should be a bigger crossover between those domains, so that projections can be tailored in a way that adaptation can really benefit from it. So also with the AMOC, I think it is super important, but it would be, well, in an ideal world, we can have research that say if the AMOC drops below this level, then we know that we have to start implementing our plans.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of that science is known. That's the problem. It's not always sure precisely, how much of an AMOC is needed for it to work properly, I guess. And I see there's a question, but I'm going to just have my follow-on question, and that's based on in the first part of your talk, you mentioned that there is this program of work in the Netherlands to make sure that the rivers and the dikes are going to be, good enough to protect the population by, I think, 2050 or something, I think you said. And then my question is this going to be enough if we have these more extensive increases in sea level rise, or do you think the government in the Netherlands believes that once they've done all of these upgrades, made these dikes higher, it's going to be enough?
Well, I think so to clarify, I didn't
maybe I misunderstood.
No. So the program has to be finished by 2050, but it already includes conditions up to 1 meter of sea level rise.
Okay.
I think the government is very well aware that sea level rise could have a huge impact for the Netherlands. And then it's a bit of a search how you can have a trade-off between. So we have huge shortages of houses. So do you want to build? So from the long-term adaptation perspective, we say do not build near your present-day dikes, because if you need to, it's not only heightening the dikes, also the dike foot will become much wider. So if you have houses there, you cannot widen the dikes. But there's always a trade-off between those two. So between present-day needs and future conditions. I think at the moment, but we have this cyclic approach. I think it's very well known that adaptation is a continuous process. So we will not be done. So once this program is finalized by 2050, it's not done.
The program will probably have to start. Yeah.
But this is part of living in a low-lying country, that we continuously have to adapt ourselves. And as long as it goes not too fast, I'm quite convinced that we can adapt. And I think, if it goes very fast, then it might become difficult.
Yeah, and probably the Netherlands is the most ready for these adaptations certainly in Europe. I don't think there's many other parts of Europe that has had to adapt as much as you guys have, and probably that means your government is already halfway ready to
and I fully agree there. We have this because we are, so I think it makes a big difference if you are already 1 meter below mean sea level, because that means that you have all your structures in place. You have a system in place, you have pumps, as I just we have this whole network of water systems to pump all the water out. And this is, I think, a big difference compared to areas that are at the moment 20 centimeters below mean sea level, and then might be 80 centimeters or 20 centimeters above mean sea level, and that have to make the shift to 80 centimeters below, because that also means that you do not have your whole system in place there.
Yeah. All right, so a question here from Fiona Grant, who's the chair of the Marine Board. Well, nice to hear you, Fiona. She says, thank you very much for an interesting seminar and setting out the vulnerability to sea level change. She talked about societal discussions on the various adaptation policy pathways, and this is the area that in Ireland can be very challenging, where proposed or necessary seawalls are challenged by citizens as they may, for example, block sea views. Do you think citizens in the Netherlands are more aware, due to the vulnerability, that is also an issue? I guess it comes back to the discussion we had.
I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer this question, because it's more of a social science question. I don't know, to be honest. I think it's you can't answer this question in two ways. Yes, we have a culture where we have to adapt. So I think we have many, for instance, studies, people that want to study water management or hydraulic engineering. I think we have a big culture there. But on the same hand, people also just expect it to be fine. So it's a bit of a twofold. So because we have those high safety levels, we hardly ever have floodings. So it's not something that Dutch people are facing. So also here there is resistance once a dike needs to be heightened, because it's just it impacts people's lives. So it's not that if dike reinforcements need to be executed in the Netherlands, that then people all say, oh, that's fine, I want to be safe from the water. And then also here people say, well, it's just impacting my environment.
Yeah. And we have a question from Angel, one of our Marine Board science officers. He said, the alternative for adaptation in the Netherlands, in your alternative, do you also include the consequences for the natural environment? So if you make, if you increase the number of times that the rivers are closed, for instance, do you take into account the impact that it might have on biodiversity or nature restoration or something like that?
Yeah. Well, again, this is an answer that's a bit twofold. So on one hand, so we have in the north, we have a big Nature 2000 area, which is also intertidal areas. To some extent, they can grow. So the intertidal areas, they can grow with sea level rise. But if sea level rise goes too fast, or if the sediment supply is not sufficient, those intertidal areas could get less. And then also nature will be impacted. Then the other thing with respect to nature is that nature is also very vulnerable for increases in temperature, for also shifting. So if you have more periods with drought and with flooding. So I think with ecology, the whole, you say it, they have to, it's less clear. So I think to some extent flooding is clear. You either flood or you do not flood. And then if you flood, it's by this amount of meters. And there's a limited amount of drivers that impact flooding. So you can calculate this quite well. And therefore, I think not only in the Netherlands, but worldwide, we're quite good in this. The ecological perspective, it's different because if you have less fresh water and more saline water, is this per se a problem for ecology? Well, not necessarily, but it's a bit. So there are a lot more factors that impact your ecology, and I think, and this makes that it's more difficult to include. So to some extent it is included, and we are aware of it, and we have at the moment a big program running to also explore this. But we have less numerical models to calculate it, to put it like that.
And then Helen J also asks in the chat, the Netherlands has been a forerunner in considering nature-based solutions and building with nature. And nature restoration also has a key role to play in climate mitigation. Do you think that nature-based solutions can still remain part of the solution under the more extreme scenarios?
Yeah, depending on, I think I also showed one of the solutions or long-term implications that I showed was more in a situation where you start to live with water. And I think there you also have more natural dynamics in place. And I think with nature-based solutions, they tend to need some time to be ready or installed. So if you have salt marshes in front of a dike, it just takes time for salinization. So I think it would be quite good if we also start thinking like this. So if we want to have a certain future, then that there are implications for decisions that we make today or in the coming decades. So if we want to move towards a greener solution or have more ecological zones in place that also could help us for freshwater availability or from a flood safety perspective, we should start thinking about this now, how we want to also test this, make sure that there is a legal framework in place that you can show that those measurements are good enough and or as good as more hard infrastructure. But I think having a combination of both more ecological based or nature based solutions combined with hard engineering where needed is a good way forward. And then to kind of we have the coastal defenses for large parts depend on a sandy system with dunes and beaches in front of that, and all research so far show that this system is quite robust also on a more accelerated sea level rise.
Yeah. Okay, and I have another question. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. No, I lie. There's one more. From Dina. There's two more, in fact. Dina Eparki, or Dina, I can never pronounce your last name. She says, thank you very much for the presentation. The work is remarkable, and it's also good to see how well the scientific advice is considered by the government, also as regards the issues of uncertainty. Do you share this work internationally with other governments, and could this long-term planning approach be shared as a best practice?
Yeah, the adaptation pathways approach is shared, is also adopted by a lot of other countries. I think New Zealand now has implemented this as the approach to kind of sketch their coastal adaptation strategies. A few months ago, I spoke to somebody from USDS, from the US, who also said that they wanted to that they want to work more from this deep uncertainty perspective, having multiple visions and working with adaptation pathways. So yes, and then also with respect to the water scenarios, I think this is quite unique that particular because we look into the interface of climate change and socioeconomic developments. And I aim to write this down in a paper once I have time. But I'm happy, so please reach out to me if you have questions before that.
Yeah. I have a follow-on question. There's another question from Fran, but I have a follow-on question on that, and that is actually also coming back to the question I had before. I think the Netherlands, as I said, has been doing this for a long time, but I know that in Belgium they also have a plan for how to protect their coasts, and to me these two countries are very close to each other. So the question is, is there discussions between with your countries next door? Because in fact, also in the northern border with Germany, it's quite low lying. So, whatever decisions you make or Belgium makes will probably affect the other, and similarly with Germany. So is there some sort of intergovernmental discussions that goes on with this, or do you guys just think, okay, this is what we're going to do, and hopefully the rest will be sensible?
From the coast, I'm not that sure. I do know that from the Rhine River, that as I just pointed out, that the amount of the land and water use upstream will also impact how changes will be downstream. And we have, so at the moment, this is discussed, and there are international treatments with respect for, at the moment, mainly focusing on high water events, because for high water events it is the same. So if Germany would start building huge dikes, then the water will be much faster in the Netherlands, and overall discharge will increase. So there are international agreements on how to deal with that, and I think at the moment it is explored how to deal with changes in water use and low discharge events.
Yeah, but I think from a coastline perspective, and it's probably not necessarily the case in other countries, but certainly between Belgium, the Netherlands, and possibly that part of Germany that's on the other side of the Netherlands, it's all so interlinked ecologically. And I think the water, if you have changes in the way Belgium deals with water on this side of the border, and you guys deal with it on another side, it feels like there should be some conversations on a coastline perspective.
Yeah, I agree, and I think also at the moment the approach in at least Belgium and the Netherlands is to have a sandy system, and then so if Belgium starts to build a big wall, so there's an ongoing sediment transport from Belgium to the Netherlands, from the Netherlands to Germany, and so on. I think at the moment there are differences in policy, but
it's still okay. Okay, and I think we only have 3 minutes, so I'm going to ask Fran's question. Fran Meyer says, thank you. Great point on the circulation, SLR research and policy gap. I don't know what SLR is. As the Netherlands is in a vulnerable place due to SLR sea level rise. There we go.
Oh yeah.
Are there any scenarios of retreat or relocation inland, perhaps with neighboring countries? I think.
Not that I know of. So you mean for no, not that I know of. No.
Yeah. So I guess it means she's asking whether you assume that you will everybody will move away from the coast and more inland and sort of, get.
Yeah, we are exploring strategies where you have, so I also showed the blue map with areas that are around mean sea level or below present day mean sea level. There are scenarios on moving towards the east, but that's still within the Netherlands.
Okay.
And it's not also moving, it's more like you have a change of your economic center, or you have different ways of living in lower parts of the Netherlands.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I just want to thank you again very much, Renske. That was a great conversation we had. And I just want to quickly say that our next webinar will be on Thursday, the 20th of February. And it will be by Roberto Donavaro on restoration of deep sea habitats to rebuild European seas, which is linked to our new future science brief on the deep sea research and management needs. So I think that's all we have time for today. But thank you again, Renske. It was great. It was very interesting to hear the work that you guys are doing in the Netherlands. And hopefully we'll be able to deal with this sea level rise in the near future.
Thank you for giving this opportunity to present the work.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.